A single tile can rewrite the entire history of a civilization. This is the story of a Mosaic discovery that shattered everything experts thought they knew. You will learn how one piece of ancient art forced a complete rewrite of a society's origin story. We will explore the hidden symbols that defied tradition and the inscriptions that revealed a lost language. What does it mean for our understanding of the past when a single find challenges centuries of belief? How much of history is still waiting to be uncovered beneath our feet? What do you believe is truly set in stone about our past? The soil gave way not to broken pottery or crumbling foundations, but to a burst of color. Deep in a remote excavation site, a team's trowels scraped against something hard and smooth. They had expected the usual fragments of a lost age, but instead they uncovered the edge of a mosaic. With painstaking care, they brushed away centuries of compacted earth to reveal a sprawling scene rendered in thousands of tiny, perfectly placed tiles. The colors were astonishingly vibrant: rich blues, fiery reds, and gold leaf that still shimmered in the sunlight after all this time. The initial thrill of such a pristine find was quickly replaced by a profound sense of bewilderment. Nothing about the artwork matched what they knew. The figures depicted wore unfamiliar robes and held objects that belonged to no known tradition from this region. The symbols woven into the border were completely alien, a visual language no modern scholar could read. This was not a simple illustration of a known myth or a celebration of a documented ruler. The archaeologists slowly realized they were not just looking at a beautiful artifact, they were staring at a contradiction. Every tile, every carefully crafted image challenged the history books. This mosaic was not a confirmation of the past. It was a confident, silent argument against it, preserved perfectly as if it had been waiting for this very moment to present its case. For generations, the official story was clear and absolute. This civilization was said to have sprung from a single, great migration around 2000 BCE. According to ancient chronicles, a unified people traveled from a distant homeland, bringing with them their language, their gods, and their customs. They settled this land and built their society from scratch, their culture developing in a straight, predictable line. This narrative was supported by earlier archaeological discoveries that seemed to confirm the timeline and the cultural influences from their powerful neighbors. The story was neat, it was tidy, and it was taught in every classroom. It became a cornerstone of national identity, a point of pride that felt as solid as the stone ruins themselves. The evidence for this origin story came from a handful of precious yet fragmented texts. These sources, often written by the victors or the elite centuries after the events they described, were treated as gospel. They presented a picture of a homogeneous culture, a people with one shared history and one artistic style. Any archaeologist or historian who dared to suggest an alternative, perhaps a more complex origin involving multiple groups or an earlier founding date, was quietly sidelined. Their ideas were considered speculative, not worthy of challenging the established, comfortable truth. The framework was not just accepted, it was set in stone. The mosaic's central panel was a universe of contradictions. At its heart blazed a sun unlike any ever seen in this culture's art. It was not a solitary, celestial ruler, but a star deeply intertwined with life. Its golden rays did not simply shine downward. They flowed and twisted like rivers, weaving through the forms of leaping fish and strange, serpentine sea creatures. This was a cosmology that married the heavens to the deep ocean, a concept that was utterly foreign to everything experts had documented. The established belief system was clear. Their gods lived in the sky, and their worship was a dry, terrestrial affair. The sea was a distant, unknown void, never incorporated into their sacred symbols. Yet here it was, rendered with masterful precision, the sun and the sea locked in a harmonious dance. This was not a minor variation. It was a theological revolution in tile and mortar. Art historians studying the piece felt a growing sense of dislocation. The technical execution, the way the tiles were cut and set to create fluid, almost living lines, felt strangely familiar. It bore a striking resemblance to mosaics created by maritime cultures hundreds of miles away, peoples who were known to worship sea gods and navigate by the stars. This was the first undeniable clue. The accepted history insisted this civilization was isolated and culturally pure, developing in a vacuum before its later expansion. But this artistic fingerprint suggested a different story. It hinted at deep, formative connections that had been completely erased from the record. Perhaps there were traders who shared not just goods but ideas. Maybe there were travelers or even settlers who brought their own beliefs and artistic styles, weaving them into the very fabric of this society from its very beginning. The mosaic was not just a picture, it was a silent witness to conversations across vast distances, conversations that the history books never knew happened. But the artwork was only the first piece of the puzzle. Winding its way around the entire mosaic, framing this cosmic ocean, was a border of text. The script was a series of elegant, curling characters, utterly unlike the blocky, angular writing known from all other monuments of this civilization. It was a script that simply did not belong, a complete anomaly. For the linguists called to the site, this was the moment the mystery deepened from an artistic curiosity into a full-blown historical upheaval. The process of decipherment was painstaking, a slow and frustrating puzzle. They had no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text to guide them. They had only the mosaic itself, and the hope that the symbols might correspond to the images they surrounded. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. A specific character cluster always appeared near the depiction of the sun. Another was consistently paired with the strange sea creatures. Word by painstaking word, a language began to emerge from the silence of centuries, and what they found was revolutionary. The language was not a precursor to the known tongue of this civilization. It was something else entirely, a distinct dialect that shared a deeper, older root. It contained grammatical structures that were more complex, and a vocabulary filled with words for sailing, for tides, for specific types of fish and nautical navigation. These were words that had no equivalent in the established language, concepts that the civilization was never supposed to have known. The official timeline stated their language developed in complete isolation for its first 500 years, a pure and untouched system of communication. But this inscription told a different story. It revealed a language that was already a hybrid, already rich with loanwords and structural influences from distant maritime cultures. It proved that from the very beginning, this was not an isolated people. They were connected, they were traders, they were listeners, they were assimilators. They were in contact with seafaring peoples from across the water, learning their terms for the stars and the currents, and weaving those very words into their own sacred art. The history books spoke of a people who looked inward. The mosaic's border spoke of a people who looked out to the horizon, their language a living record of journeys they were never supposed to have taken. The true shock, however, lay not just in the images or the words, but in the very hands that made it. A microscopic analysis of the mosaic's construction revealed a third, equally damning clue. The artisans had used a technique called Opus Vermiculatum, a method of setting tiny, irregularly shaped tiles to create subtle color gradients and incredibly lifelike curves. This was not a primitive first attempt. It was the work of a master, a technique so advanced it was thought to have been invented centuries later by a rival empire hundreds of miles to the east. The skill required to cut these minuscule tesserae and set them at precise angles to catch the light was immense. This level of sophistication did not appear out of nowhere. It was learned, practiced, and perfected. The presence of this technique was a silent scream in the archaeological record. It implied a direct line of influence, a sharing of artistic secrets across vast cultural divides. Perhaps a traveling master came to teach, or a local apprentice journeyed to a distant city to learn from the best. Either scenario was a direct contradiction to the official story of an isolated, inwardly focused culture developing all its skills on its own. The evidence became even more concrete when researchers analyzed the tiles themselves. The deep, lapis lazuli blue that formed the Mosaic's ocean was not local. Its chemical signature matched quarries in a mountain range over 1,000 miles away. The vibrant reds came from cinnabar deposits known to be controlled by a powerful neighboring kingdom. These were not accidental inclusions. They were deliberate, expensive imports, proof of established and sophisticated long-distance trade routes. Historians had always maintained that such networks only developed in the civilization's golden age, 500 years after this mosaic was created. But here was physical, chemical proof that those trade routes were not a later achievement. They were the very foundation upon which the society was built. The civilization was not a lone star that slowly grew brighter. It was, from its very beginning, a constellation, connected by invisible lines of exchange and influence to the wider ancient world. The figures in the mosaic were not merely decorative, they were a window into a lost world of worship. In one panel, a procession of people moves toward what appears to be a natural spring, their hands not raised in the familiar gesture of skyward prayer, but lowered, cupping the water as it bubbles from the earth. They are offering not grain or animals, but intricately woven baskets filled with glowing embers. The fire hisses as it touches the water's surface, a ritual of elemental fusion that has no parallel in any known religious text from this civilization. Their faith, as recorded by later scribes, was one of strict separation. Fire was for the altar, a gift for the sky gods. Water was for purification, a practical necessity. They were never to be combined in such a dramatic public spectacle. This ceremony suggests a belief in the sacredness of the meeting point, the moment where opposites collide to create something new, a theology that is entirely absent from the official canon. Even more telling than the actions are the actors themselves. The participants in this ritual are not dressed in the simple, monochrome robes we see in later art. Their garments are elaborate, a riot of patterns and colors. Some wear tall, conical headdresses that are a known trademark of the mountain tribes to the north. Others have belts adorned with cowrie shells, a currency and status symbol of the coastal traders from across the sea. Their accessories are a catalogue of foreign influence, each item a tiny flag representing a different culture. This is not the image of a homogeneous, isolated people practicing a faith that sprang solely from their own soil. This is a portrait of syncretism, the beautiful, messy blending of traditions. It shows a society comfortable with adopting the spiritual practices of their neighbors, weaving them into a new and complex tapestry of belief. Why was this vibrant spiritual diversity erased from history? The answer likely lies not in accident but in design. As this civilization grew into a powerful, centralized state, its rulers may have sought to consolidate power by promoting a single, unified national identity. A single origin story is easier to control than a dozen. A single state religion creates more loyal subjects than 100 competing cults. The complex, inclusive faith depicted in the Mosaic, one that honored the gods of the mountains and the spirits of the sea alongside their own, may have been seen as a threat. It was perhaps systematically suppressed, its rituals outlawed, its priests sidelined, and its very memory scrubbed from the official records. The history that was written was the history of the victors, a streamlined narrative of cultural purity that served a political purpose. The Mosaic, hidden by time and earth, is the history of the people. It is a silent witness to a richer, more varied spiritual life, a testament to the idea that before there was one truth, there were many. But the clues were not confined to gods and rituals. The very skyline of this ancient world was painted in the Mosaic's background. Behind the figures and their elemental rites, the artist had depicted a city. Its buildings were not the low, rectangular structures with flat roofs that archaeologists had painstakingly mapped from the known ruins. Instead, they rose with elegant, sweeping arches and were supported by slender, fluted columns that tapered at the top. These were not minor decorative flourishes. This was a complete architectural style, one that was the unmistakable signature of the seafaring Thalassians, a culture thriving across the water at the exact same time. According to the old history, the two peoples were distant strangers, separated by a vast and unnavigable gulf for centuries. There should have been no shared arches, no borrowed blueprints. Yet here they were, rendered in stunning detail, suggesting that a Thalassian architect, or at the very least their influential designs, had found a home in this land. This was not a story of casual influence. The prominence of these structures in a sacred artwork implies they were central to the city's identity, perhaps symbols of prestige and power. It hints at a possible Thalassian colony, a bustling trading enclave, or even a period of joint rule, a fusion of cultures so complete that it shaped the very stones they walked upon. For modern archaeologists, this visual evidence has become a treasure map. They are now poring over excavation reports from old sites, looking at piles of unidentified rubble with fresh eyes. Could that curved stone fragment once have been part of an arch? Might that circular foundation have supported a column instead of a simple post? The search is on for the physical remains of these forgotten cities, the urban centers that historical records conveniently forgot. Finding even one would do more than just confirm the Mosaic story. It would force a complete redrawing of the ancient map, adding new dots for trading posts and sister cities that were airbrushed from history. It would prove that the civilization's origins were not a solitary seed planted in barren soil, but a garden already rich with imported and interconnected life. The most devastating blow to the old story came not from art or language, but from pure, unassailable science. When samples of the Mosaic's mortar were sent for carbon dating, the results sent a seismic shock through the academic world. The organic materials mixed into the ancient lime plaster returned a date that was not just a few decades off. It was a full 2 centuries older than the civilization's official, documented founding date. The implications of this were staggering. The Mosaic was not a product of a young, burgeoning society. It was a masterpiece created by a culture that was already mature, already sophisticated, at a time when historians insisted they should not have even existed yet. This was not a minor adjustment to the timeline. It was a complete demolition of it. The society did not slowly develop its artistic skills, its trade networks, and its complex theology over 500 years. It apparently began with them. This forces a complete rethinking of what the term Golden Age even means. Perhaps it was not a later period of peak achievement, but simply the only era that later chroniclers allowed to be remembered. The earlier, true beginning, with its diverse influences and complex origins, may have been deliberately forgotten. why would historians from a later era compress time and backdate a founding? The answer is often about legitimacy. A newer ruling dynasty seeking to solidify its power might invent a long, unbroken lineage stretching back to a single, heroic moment of origin. A cleaner, simpler story of gradual progress from humble beginnings is far easier to control and far more inspiring than a messy, complicated truth involving foreign alliances and cultural blending. The carbon date does not just change a number in a textbook. It reveals that the history we inherited was not a record. It was a carefully crafted propaganda, a fiction designed to serve the powerful, and the Mosaic is the one piece of evidence that survived to tell the real story. The Mosaic was not hidden away in a private villa or a royal tomb. It was unearthed at the very heart of the ancient city, in a vast, open plaza where people would have gathered daily for market, for news, and for ceremony. Its immense size and dominant position leave no doubt. This was not a decoration. It was a declaration. It was a public billboard for an entire society's identity, meant to be seen and understood by everyone, from the highest priest to the lowest merchant. In its vibrant, welcoming imagery, we see a society confident enough to display its diverse roots for all to see. It celebrated the mountain tribes, the sea traders, and the foreign architects, weaving them all into a single, glorious narrative of who they were. This was a message of unity built on integration, not isolation. It suggests a period where acknowledging your many influences was a source of strength, not a political weakness. This stands in stark opposition to the later historical record, which promotes a culture of secrecy, of exclusive knowledge held only by the elite, and a single, pure origin story that brooked no dissent. The Mosaic's very placement hints at a profound cultural shift. That initial era of openness, where your God and my God could share a temple wall, was likely seen as a threat by a later, more centralized power. A unified people are easier to rule than a collection of diverse tribes with their own traditions. The Mosaic's message of blended unity may have been too powerful, too potent a reminder of a different way of life. And so, the new rulers did not just rewrite the history books. They may have literally buried the evidence, paving over the old forum and its challenging art, hoping to silence its complex, beautiful truth for good. The Mosaic's unveiling did not bring quiet consensus, but a storm of academic conflict. Respected professors who had built their entire careers on the old timeline found themselves staring at evidence that dismantled their life's work. The initial reaction was not celebration, but a deep and profound skepticism. Some immediately declared the Mosaic a forgery, a clever hoax planted to deceive them. Others dismissed it as an anomaly, a single strange piece of art that could not possibly outweigh decades of established research. The debate spilled out of the excavation site and into the halls of universities, across the pages of prestigious journals, and onto the stage of international conferences. It was no longer a quiet academic discussion. It was a war of ideas. The traditionalists, guardians of the accepted narrative, argued for extreme caution. They warned against rushing to rewrite history based on one flashy discovery. They demanded more evidence, more corroboration, suggesting that the carbon dating must have been contaminated or that the artistic analysis was flawed. Their resistance was not just about facts. It was about protecting a system of belief, a story that had become part of their own identity. On the other side, a growing number of revisionists saw the Mosaic not as a problem, but as the key to a solution. For them, it finally explained the nagging inconsistencies that had plagued the field for years, those little pieces of pottery or odd architectural fragments that never quite fit the official story. They argued that this was the paradigm shift the discipline desperately needed, a chance to break free from a history that was more legend than truth. This fierce battle reveals a difficult truth about how we understand the past. History is not just a collection of facts waiting to be found. It is a story shaped by consensus, by the agreement of experts. And when a discovery challenges that consensus, it does not just challenge ideas. It challenges authority, credibility, and the very power to decide what is real. The Mosaic forced every historian and archaeologist to answer a deeply personal question. Do you cling to the story you know, or do you have the courage to follow the evidence into the unknown? The Mosaic refuses to be studied in isolation. When experts placed its images side by side with artifacts from neighboring cultures, a stunning pattern emerged. That unique sun and sea motif, once thought to be a bizarre anomaly, was not unique at all. Nearly identical symbols were found on pottery shards from a coastal people hundreds of miles to the south, a culture historians had long classified as a rival trading partner, not a close ally. The intricate, swirling border patterns matched those in textiles woven by nomadic desert tribes, groups the official records described only as persistent raiders to be kept at bay. Even the style of the figures, their postures, and the way they held their hands echoed statues carved in distant mountain kingdoms. Each of these cultures had been neatly placed into separate boxes in the history books, categorized by their differences and their supposed conflicts. The Mosaic acts like a magnet, pulling all these disparate pieces together into a single, coherent picture. It reveals a web of shared artistic language that stretches across deserts, mountains, and seas. This was not a series of random, hostile encounters. It was a sustained and sophisticated dialogue, a conversation in clay and color that lasted for generations. The implications are breathtaking. This civilization was not a lone fortress, proud and isolated. It was a vital hub in a vast, ancient network of exchange. Its artists were not just local craftsmen. They were keen observers of a wider world, absorbing techniques and ideas from every corner of their known universe and blending them into something entirely new. This forces a complete redrawing of the ancient world map. The blank spaces between civilizations, once thought to be empty and dangerous voids, must now be filled with the crisscrossing lines of trade routes, the paths of traveling artisans, and the flow of shared stories. The history of this one culture can no longer be told alone. Its origin story is now irrevocably intertwined with the origin stories of a dozen others, a collective narrative of connection that we are only just beginning to understand. For centuries, the elders of the surrounding villages told a story their children called a fairy tale. It spoke of a time when the great sun above was married to the sea below, and their children were the strange, glowing creatures of the deep. They sang of rituals at the bubbling springs where fire met water to bless the land. Academics and historians had long dismissed these tales as simple folklore, charming fictions invented to explain the natural world. They were not considered history, they were myth, and they were filed away as imaginative curiosities. But the moment the Mosaic was fully revealed, those old stories stopped being fiction. The elders had been describing with astonishing accuracy the very scenes laid out in the tile. The leaping fish intertwined with solar rays, the ceremony at the spring, the hybrid sea serpents, every element that baffled scholars was there, preserved not in mortar but in memory. The oral traditions were not invented fantasies. They were a living, breathing archive, a stubborn echo of a truth that written records had tried to erase. This realization has sent ethnographers racing into the highland villages and coastal towns, carrying photographs of the Mosaic. They are sitting with community elders, not as scientists interviewing subjects, but as students listening to teachers. They are carefully recording songs, poems, and family stories that have been passed down for generations, stories once considered irrelevant to the grand narrative of history. A simple tale about a traveling blacksmith from across the water might hold a clue about trade routes. A legend about a great flood could be a cultural memory of a real geological event. These narratives are the fragments of a shattered vase, and the ethnographers are trying to glue them back together, one story at a time. They are learning that history is not only written on scrolls or set in tile. It is also carried on the breath of storytellers, a resilient thread of memory that can outlast empires and outweight the silence of the earth. The mosaic's true technical genius only becomes clear under a microscope. Each tiny tile or tessera was cut with a precision that defies the era. The edges are not rough or chipped, but clean and sharp, angled perfectly to catch the light and create a shimmering, almost liquid effect across the surface. This is not the work of a culture using primitive stone tools. It reveals the use of advanced, hardened metal blades, perhaps even early forms of diamond-tipped cutters, technology that was not supposed to exist for another 300 years according to the established timeline. The artisans did not just have better tools, they possessed a deep understanding of material science. The pigments binding the colors to the glass and stone tiles have not faded. The brilliant blues and fiery reds are as intense today as they were the day they were set. Chemical analysis shows they used complex, stable compounds, mixing minerals with plant-based fixatives in exact, repeatable formulas. This indicates a sophisticated knowledge of chemistry that was simply not attributed to them at this early date. They were not just artists, they were early material engineers. This technological leap was not an isolated local invention. The specific cutting technique mirrors methods perfected by metalworkers in a distant empire, while the pigment formulas are nearly identical to those used by glassmakers across the sea. This is the most compelling evidence yet of a massive, silent technology transfer. Knowledge was not developing in isolation. It was flowing along those same trade routes that brought the lapis lazuli and the cinnabar. Master craftsmen, chemists, and engineers must have been traveling, sharing their secrets, and collaborating in ways the history books never recorded. The civilization did not slowly invent these advanced methods on its own. It was plugged into a vibrant, international network of innovation from its very first days, a participant in a technological revolution that we never knew happened. This single mosaic does not just rewrite ancient history, it holds the power to reshape modern national identities. The official origin story, the one of a pure, isolated people emerging from a single migration, is not just a tale for textbooks. For generations, it has been a bedrock of national pride, a foundation for cultural unity, and in some cases, even a justification for territorial claims. This narrative, now proven false by a floor of tiles, was a pillar holding up a very modern political structure. Imagine the shockwaves when a discovery suggests that your nation's celebrated founders were not a unique, homogeneous group, but a melting pot of diverse immigrants and foreign influences. The very idea of what it means to belong to that nation is suddenly called into question. Governments and state-sponsored cultural institutions, which have spent decades and vast sums of money promoting a specific, heroic version of the past, now face an impossible choice. Do they embrace a more complex but historically accurate story of blended origins, or do they protect the simpler, more powerful myth that has long served to unite the population and legitimize their authority? The instinct is often to resist, to dismiss the new evidence as an anomaly or even a foreign conspiracy to undermine national sovereignty. We have seen this pattern before across the globe. When archaeological findings challenge a cherished national myth, the response is rarely a simple academic debate. it becomes a political firestorm. The past is not a neutral territory. It is a landscape that is constantly being fought over, a tool that can be weaponized to serve the agendas of the present. A new origin story can destabilize everything. It can empower minority groups whose contributions were erased, or it can be seized upon by rival nations to challenge long-standing borders drawn based on that old, now discredited history. The Mosaic, in its silent, beautiful way, is more than an artifact. It is a political statement from the deep past, one that forces us to ask who truly owns history and who gets to decide what story we tell about ourselves. This quiet revolution now echoes through the hushed halls of museums worldwide. For generations, these institutions have presented a clear, linear progression of this civilization, their exhibits built upon the foundation of that single origin story. The artifacts were arranged to tell that specific tale, each part and tool a chapter in a book everyone thought was complete. Now, curators face a daunting task. Entire exhibit labels, educational panels, and audio tour narratives are suddenly incorrect. A vase once described as a prime example of early local craftsmanship might now need a new description, one that acknowledges clear influences from foreign potters. The timeline displayed on the wall, a staple of such exhibits, is now fundamentally wrong. Updating a museum is not like updating a textbook. It is a physical, expensive, and very public undertaking. It means carefully installing precious objects, redesigning entire galleries, and rewriting the story that millions of visitors will see. This is more than an academic exercise. It is the physical rebranding of a culture's entire past, and it must be done with immense care and respect. The Mosaic itself will soon take its place as the centerpiece of a new exhibition, no longer a mysterious outlier but the key that unlocks a truer, richer history. Its display will not be a solitary act. It will be surrounded by artifacts from those once distant cultures: Thalassian coins, mountain tribe textiles, coastal pottery finally shown together as they always should have been, telling the story of a connected ancient world. The unearthing of one Mosaic has unearthed a far more profound ethical dilemma. For generations, the interpretation of the past has been a top-down affair, where the written word of ancient elites was often granted more weight than the physical evidence left behind by the common people. The texts, often created to serve a political or religious agenda, were treated as the ultimate authority. The Mosaic shatters that hierarchy. It forces a difficult but necessary question. When a text and a tangible artifact directly contradict each other, which one do we trust? The answer seems obvious, but in practice, it is a battlefield. For too long, the official story, backed by those powerful texts, was allowed to dismiss inconvenient archaeological finds as anomalies or imports, never as evidence that the texts themselves might be propaganda. This discovery demands a new balance, a methodology where the shovel and the scroll are seen as equal partners in the search for truth, each keeping the other honest. This rebalancing is deeply tied to a larger, global movement to decolonize history. The old narrative of a pure, isolated civilization is a colonialist trope, one that has been used by powerful states across the world to justify expansion and suppress minority cultures within their borders. By presenting a homogeneous past, they could argue for a homogeneous present, sidelining the rich contributions of smaller groups, traders, and immigrants. The Mosaic, with its celebration of diverse influences, is a direct refutation of that. It proves that the indigenous mountain tribes and the seafaring traders were not peripheral characters. They were co-authors of this civilization's earliest chapters. Ethical archaeology now requires actively seeking out those overlooked narratives, not as footnotes but as central plot lines. It means collaborating with descendant communities, listening to their oral histories not as quaint folklore but as vital historical records, and finally acknowledging that the story of a culture cannot be told solely by studying its palaces and its kings. The true story is found in the marketplace, the artisan's workshop, and the tiles underfoot, where the blended lives of everyday people are forever preserved. This single floor of tiles has become the ultimate case study in how history is written, and more importantly, how it is rewritten. It demonstrates that our understanding of the past is not a fixed monument, but a living conversation that evolves with every new discovery pulled from the earth. For centuries, an entire civilization was viewed through the narrow lens of a handful of ancient texts, their story seemingly complete. The arrival of this one mosaic did not just add a new chapter. It demanded that every previous chapter be reread, questioned, and edited. It is a powerful lesson in intellectual humility for every scholar and every enthusiast, a reminder that the most confident historical narrative is only ever our best current guess, always provisional and always subject to change. This artifact challenges the very idea of dogma in history. It asks us to consider how many other fields of study might be clinging to outdated models, simply because no one has yet found the evidence powerful enough to challenge them. The mosaic stands as an inspiration to remain open, to welcome anomalies instead of dismissing them, and to understand that the most exciting phrase in the pursuit of knowledge is not "we know," but "what if?" News of the mosaic did not stay within the quiet halls of academia for long. The story exploded into the public consciousness, a whirlwind of headlines and television specials that brought an ancient mystery into millions of living rooms. Major networks rushed documentary crews to the site, their cameras capturing the painstaking work of brushing dust from a 2,000-year-old secret. The world watched, utterly captivated, as each new tile revealed a face, a symbol, a line of text that challenged everything we thought we knew. This was not a dry historical footnote. It was a live, unfolding drama, a real-time rewrite of human history, and everyone had a front-row seat. The public fascination was immediate and intense. People who had never given ancient history a second thought were suddenly debating carbon dating techniques over dinner and arguing about Thalassian architectural influence on social media. The mosaic became a global conversation piece because it tapped into a universal human desire, the thrill of the mystery and the powerful idea that the past is not a closed book, but a story with missing pages we are still finding. This widespread engagement demonstrated a crucial truth. Archaeology is not just for experts. When a discovery is presented not as a settled fact, but as an active investigation, it becomes a shared human experience, a collective puzzle we are all trying to solve together. The mosaic has not provided all the answers. Instead, it has handed scientists a new and far more intriguing set of questions, a roadmap for the next generation of discovery. Its depiction of a seafaring culture has sparked a bold new mission: underwater archaeology. Teams are now preparing sonar equipment and submersibles to scan the seabed along ancient coastlines, searching for the submerged ruins of ports or even entire trading settlements that sank beneath the waves millennia ago. Finding just one sunken Thalassian trading vessel, its hull packed with artifacts, could provide the physical proof of those early maritime connections the mosaic so vividly illustrates. At the same time, geneticists are joining the search, collecting DNA samples from ancient burial sites across the region. By analyzing the genetic code of the civilization's earliest people, they hope to trace a literal map of ancestry and migration. Do the bones show a sudden influx of new genes from across the water around the time the mosaic was made? Or do they reveal a slow, steady blending of mountain, coastal, and desert populations over centuries, a biological echo of the artistic blending in the tiles. This is no longer a solitary pursuit for archaeologists. The investigation has become a grand, interdisciplinary collaboration, a meeting of minds from fields that rarely spoke the same language. Linguists are working with geneticists to see if changes in language patterns match changes in the population. Chemists are analyzing trade goods to trace them back to their source, while climatologists are reconstructing ancient weather patterns to understand what routes were even possible to sail. The mosaic is the catalyst, the single point from which all these lines of inquiry now radiate outward. It has transformed from a static object into a dynamic springboard, launching us toward a future where the true, interconnected origin of this civilization may finally be pulled, fully formed, from the depths of both the earth and our own understanding. The ripple effects of this discovery are now reshaping the very walls of art museums. For generations, the artistic timeline of this civilization was presented as a predictable climb from simple geometric patterns to more complex, but still isolated, figurative scenes. The mosaic explodes that tidy progression. Art historians are no longer viewing it as a bizarre anomaly. They now see it as the missing link, the crucial piece of evidence that finally explains the sudden, dramatic leaps in style and technique that had always puzzled experts. It proves that their art did not develop in a vacuum. It was a dynamic conversation with the wider world. This single flaw is forcing a complete reattribution of countless other artworks. A painting once confidently dated to the late Golden Age, due to its sophisticated use of color and perspective, might now be moved centuries earlier on the timeline. Its advanced qualities are no longer mysterious. They are simply evidence of that early, forgotten period of international exchange that the mosaic represents. A statue carved in a unique hybrid style, previously dismissed as a poorly executed copy or a provincial oddity, is now being re-examined as a potential masterpiece from this newly discovered artistic school. The mosaic provides the key, the undeniable proof that such a blended style not only existed but was celebrated. This means the entire chronology of their artistic development is being rewritten. What was once seen as a straight line is now understood as a complex web of influences, with dead ends, revivals, and periods of intense cross-pollination. The art was not just a reflection of their history, it was an active participant in it, a visual record of connections that the written record tried to sever. This single artifact from the ancient world speaks directly to the heart of modern identity. The mosaic story of a blended, interconnected origin offers a powerful lesson for any society built on a myth of cultural purity. It asks us to consider the stories we tell ourselves about our own pasts, and to question whether those narratives are built on historical fact or political convenience. The revelation that a celebrated civilization was, from its very beginning, a fusion of diverse peoples challenges the very foundation of nationalism that relies on a single, exclusive origin story. It suggests that strength does not come from isolation, but from the ability to integrate, to learn from neighbors, and to weave foreign threads into your own cultural fabric. This is not about erasing a unique identity, but about enriching it by acknowledging the complex, often messy, truth of its formation. In a globalized world where people, ideas, and cultures are more interconnected than ever, this ancient lesson feels urgently modern. It provides a historical precedent for embracing hybrid identities, for seeing the mixing of cultures not as a threat to tradition, but as a timeless and powerful source of innovation and resilience. By looking at this mosaic, we are ultimately looking into a mirror, reflecting on our own capacity to build more inclusive societies by accepting that our shared histories have always been more complex and more interesting than the simple stories we often choose to tell. This world-changing mosaic was almost never found at all. The initial survey that led to its discovery was not a major, well-funded expedition targeting a promising royal complex or temple. It was a routine assessment of a nondescript field, a procedural step required before a planned irrigation project could break ground. The team expected to find little more than scattered pottery fragments, the usual detritus of any long-inhabited area. Their discovery was not the result of a brilliant new theory or a targeted search. It was pure, unadulterated luck, a chance encounter with history that reminds us how much of the past still lies hidden, waiting for the right moment and the right set of circumstances to be revealed. This element of serendipity is the quiet, beating heart of archaeology. For every meticulously planned dig at a known historical site, there are dozens of these chance finds, the accidental revelations that truly rewrite the narrative. A farmer's plow striking a buried sarcophagus, a storm eroding a cliff face to reveal a cave painting, a construction crew digging a foundation and hitting the wall of a lost city. These are not rare exceptions, they are how some of the most profound discoveries are made. This inherent unpredictability makes a powerful argument for the importance of widespread, consistent funding for archaeological surveys and preservation efforts. It is not enough to only explore the places we are certain will yield treasures. We must also investigate the fields, the hills, and the forgotten corners of the map, because we simply do not know what we do not know. A site deemed less promising by one generation, with its layers of history compressed and hidden, might hold the key that unlocks everything for the next. This reality adds a layer of profound romance to the entire field. It transforms every excavation from a simple date, a gathering mission, into a potential lottery ticket, a gamble where the prize is not money, but a fundamental piece of our shared human story. Every shovel of earth turned, no matter how routine the task, carries the faint, thrilling possibility of revealing a secret the earth has kept for millennia. The most persistent myth the mosaic dismantles is the comforting lie of cultural purity. For too long, the popular imagination painted ancient civilizations as isolated monoliths, each developing in a pristine bubble of their own unique genius. This mosaic, with its undeniable blend of foreign gods, imported materials, and shared artistic language, proves that such a thing never truly existed. Every great culture was, from its very beginning, a product of connection. They were conversations, not monologues. This revelation does more than just correct a historical error. It actively counters the exclusionary narratives that have used this myth of purity to justify modern prejudices, border walls, and ethnic tensions. When a political movement claims that a nation must return to some idealized, homogeneous past, the mosaic stands as a silent, powerful rebuttal. It proves that the past was never homogeneous. It was always a vibrant, sometimes chaotic, tapestry of exchange. This demystification is not a loss of heritage. It is a reclamation of a richer, more honest history, one that acknowledges the countless hands from countless places that built the world we have inherited. It replaces a story of isolation with a story of collaboration, arguing that our greatest strength has never been our purity, but our profound and enduring capacity to adapt, to learn, and to blend. Preserving this vibrant window into the past is a race against time and the elements. The moment the mosaic was exposed to the modern atmosphere, a delicate battle began. Sunlight, even the diffuse light of a cloudy day, threatens to fade the brilliant pigments that have survived for millennia in perfect darkness. The slightest change in humidity can cause the ancient mortar to expand or contract, potentially popping the tiny tiles loose from their bed. Even the vibrations from a passing truck or the footfall of a visitor could, over time, destabilize the entire structure. This is not a relic that can simply be placed under glass. It requires a constant, controlled microclimate, a perfect bubble of air that mimics the silent, stable tomb of Earth that protected it for so long. The conservation team working on it is a small army of specialists, each a master in their own arcane field. There are chemists who analyze the molecular structure of the 2,000-year-old adhesives to create a new glue that is strong enough to hold but reversible, should future generations develop a better technique. There are material scientists who use non-invasive lasers to map every microscopic crack and fissure, creating a digital twin of the mosaic to monitor its health in real time. This is not a restoration, it is a preservation, a painstaking effort to halt decay in its tracks without altering a single, precious detail of the original work. The project has become a truly international endeavor, with experts from a dozen countries contributing their knowledge. A master conservator from Italy, where centuries of preserving ancient Roman mosaics have forged unique skills, works alongside a materials engineer from Japan who brings cutting-edge nanotechnology to the challenge. This global collaboration underscores a profound truth that this mosaic does not belong to a single nation. It is a treasure of shared human history, and its preservation is a responsibility we all share. The ultimate goal is not just to save the artwork itself, but to safeguard the story it tells, ensuring that this single, defiant flaw can continue to challenge and inspire generations we will never meet. This single discovery has now entered the classroom, transforming history from a static list of dates into a living, breathing debate. Textbooks that once presented a single, straightforward origin story must now include a new chapter, one that begins with a question mark instead of a period. Educators are seizing this moment not as a complication, but as the ultimate teachable moment. They are no longer just teaching what happened. They are teaching how we know what happened, and more importantly, how that knowledge can change in an instant. The mosaic is the perfect tool to demonstrate the scientific method applied to history. A hypothesis, the old origin story, was tested against new evidence, the mosaic, and it was found wanting. The theory had to be revised. This process is not a sign of weakness in the field of history. It is its greatest strength. It shows students that history is not a collection of settled facts to be memorized, but a dynamic process of inquiry, a continuous conversation between the past and the present. This shift encourages a more critical engagement with all sources of information. Students learn to question not just ancient texts, but modern news articles and political speeches, understanding that every narrative has a perspective and that power often shapes the story. By presenting multiple perspectives from the very beginning, from the official royal chronicles to the silent testimony of the mosaic, education fosters a more nuanced and empathetic understanding of the past. It prepares a new generation not to accept simple stories, but to look for the complex, interconnected, and often hidden truths that make our shared history so endlessly fascinating. The true power of this mosaic lies not in its isolation, but in its connection to the world. We can no longer view this civilization as a solitary island in the stream of time. Its story is now inextricably linked to the rise and fall of empires and cultures thousands of miles away. A shift in climate that dried up trade routes in one region might explain a sudden change in artistic style here. A political revolution across the sea could have severed a centuries-old alliance, cutting off the flow of ideas and materials that this society depended upon. This artifact forces us to see ancient history not as a series of separate, parallel timelines, but as a single, intricately woven tapestry, where a pull on one thread could change the entire pattern elsewhere. This interconnected view actively dismantles older, biased historical frameworks that placed certain cultures, typically European ones, at the center of innovation and progress, while casting others as passive recipients or stagnant backwaters. That Eurocentric model simply cannot account for the evidence laid out in these tiles. It cannot explain why a master artisan in this land was using a technique perfected in Africa, or why their most sacred color came from mountains in Central Asia. The Mosaic argues for a polycentric ancient world, a network of numerous vibrant hubs of invention and culture, all influencing each other in a constant, dynamic exchange. This is a more equitable and accurate global narrative. It gives rightful credit to the mountain tribes for their spiritual contributions, to the seafaring traders for their technological prowess, and to the desert nomads for their artistic patterns, placing them all on the same historical stage as the great empires we already know. By doing so, the Mosaic does more than rewrite one origin story. It contributes to a more inclusive understanding of all human development, proving that our collective past was built not by a few isolated geniuses, but by the shared creativity of the entire ancient world. Dr. Aris, the lead archaeologist, still remembers the exact moment his trowel scraped against that first, impossibly smooth surface. He thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a piece of modern debris that had somehow sunk deep into the archaeological layer. But as he brushed the dust away, revealing not the expected brown of pottery but a flash of brilliant blue, his breath caught in his throat. He called his team over, his voice barely a whisper, and for a long moment no one spoke. They simply stared at that single, perfect tile, a tiny square of ocean blue that had no business being there. That initial jolt of excitement was quickly replaced by a slow, dawning realization of the weight they were about to lift. Every subsequent tile they uncovered felt like turning a page in a book that had been sealed shut for 2,000 years, a book whose contents were completely unexpected. For Maria, a young graduate student on the dig, the most profound memory is not of the grand central sun, but of a small, almost hidden detail. As they cleaned the section depicting the ritual at the spring, she was the one who noticed the tiny, perfectly rendered tear on the cheek of one participant. It was a single tessera of clear glass catching the light just so. That minuscule detail, a moment of human emotion frozen in time, shattered the distance between her and the ancient artist. She was no longer just studying history, she was connecting with a person, feeling the weight of their devotion across the immense gulf of centuries. It transformed the entire Mosaic from an academic puzzle into a profoundly human document, a message meant to be felt as much as deciphered. The local workers from the nearby village, whose families have lived on this land for generations, experienced the discovery on an entirely different level. Old man Yanis, who had watched archaeologists come and go for decades, initially saw the dig as just another strange project by outsiders. But when the first images of the mountain tribe's headdresses and the coastal traders' shells emerged from the earth, his skepticism turned to stunned recognition. The patterns woven into the robes were the same patterns his own grandmother used in her embroidery. The stories the Mosaic told were not just stories to him, they were echoes of the songs and tales passed down in his family, tales that university professors had always dismissed as mere folklore. For him and his community, the excavation was not an invasion, it was a vindication, a scientific affirmation that their oral history had held the truth all along. These personal stories are the human heart of the scientific process. They remind us that behind every groundbreaking headline, there are people with dirt under their nails, feeling a mix of exhilaration, exhaustion, and sometimes profound doubt. The late-night debates over coffee in the site tent, the fierce arguments with respected colleagues who thought they were wrong, The quiet moments of despair when the puzzle seemed unsolvable. This is the true engine of historical discovery. It is not a cold, clinical exercise, but a passionate, often messy, human endeavor driven by an insatiable curiosity to finally hear the stories the Earth has been waiting to tell. The true legacy of this mosaic will be measured not in decades, but in centuries of future scholarship. It will stand as a permanent monument to a fundamental shift in how we understand the ancient world, a single point in time where the entire field of history tilted on its axis. Its greatest gift is not the specific story it tells, but the mindset it demands from everyone who studies it. This artifact has become a permanent invitation to question, to doubt, and to remain open to the possibility that the next shovel of earth could contain a truth that upends everything. It champions a humble but powerful idea that our knowledge of the past is always provisional, always subject to revision by a discovery waiting just beneath the surface. This new ethos of curiosity ensures the mosaic will never become just another museum piece. It will be the starting pistol for generations of new research, inspiring archaeologists to dig in previously overlooked sites, linguists to re-examine faded inscriptions with fresh eyes, and historians to read between the lines of ancient texts with a healthy dose of skepticism. It has given permission to a whole new generation of scholars to challenge the established authorities, to pursue the anomalies, and to listen more carefully to the stories that have been marginalized. The mosaic's ultimate impact is the creation of a more dynamic, more honest, and more inclusive form of history, one that is brave enough to admit what it does not know and is always ready to be surprised. This single floor of tiles is a permanent reminder that history is not a list of facts to be memorized, but a living conversation we are all a part of. Its discovery proves that even the most deeply held beliefs about our past are not set in stone. They are only our best current understanding, a theory that is always waiting for the next piece of evidence to prove it incomplete. This challenges every one of us to look at the world with a more critical eye, to question the simple stories we are told, and to embrace the beautiful, messy complexity that is our shared human heritage. As we continue to pull clues from the earth, we are not just learning about those who came before us, we are learning about the very nature of truth and memory. We are learning that our place in the tapestry of time is not as solitary threads, but as part of a vast, interconnected weave. Let this incredible find be an inspiration to stay curious, to stay critical, and to never stop seeking the truth, no matter how deeply it has been buried.